Hi guys, I'm Gina and welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to be going through and building out the 70s kitchen and dinette, which is the fusion project of mine that I've got on the go, which is taking a Victorian mansion. So very much the external part of the building will be very Victorian, but the interior is going to be 1970s, very much a modern 1970s vibe. The inspiration comes from a 1973 House and Garden magazine, so quite a modern interior, but lots of pattern, lots of colour, a few kitsch items that'll really bring the flavour of the 1970s. So hopefully you enjoy this video and let's get started. So here is the magazine, the 1973 House and Garden magazine, and as you can see there's lots of design ideas, and here's the kitchen inspiration that we're going to work from today. So to begin with, I'm going to take out the plan that I drew a couple of videos ago and just sort of make sure that everything sort of lines up, and then I'm going to start building out the base cabinets. So to begin with, what I'm doing here is actually cutting out the bench top. So I'm cutting out the shape of the bench top, and then I'm actually going to use 2 layers of mat board. It would have been better if I had to use 2mm thick mat board. That would have been ideal, but I am using what I had. So this is 1mm thick mat board. So sandwiching 2 together meant that I can actually create a reasonably thick bench top, and it's what I end up finishing with in the end. So I'm just going to go through and cut out all of the pieces that I need to start creating the cabinets. The cabinets are not going to open, they're just for display purposes, and I debated a lot whether to actually create them so that they open and then have the kitchen and drawers also opening as well. I opted for this because it was just going to be a lot quicker to pull together, and it just meant that I could get the look that I'm after without spending too much time. I think maybe if I was going to do it again and if I had a little bit more time, then I'd look to create them so that they open. Here I'm just cutting out the bit for the window, because basically the bench is going to go straight across the window. I come up with a few different ideas and a few different plans, but this one I'm actually happy with. I'm actually happy with the way that it's going to come together. So I cut out the sink as well. I probably should have done that while the bench was in place without having anything glued to it. And then I'm just going to work my way through and just creating some box shapes basically for all of the pantry and wall oven, and then all of the cupboards underneath the benches as well. So all of the cabinets have been created now, and I'm just going to move on and add in a toe kick into around the kitchen. I probably could have done this in another step, but it was a bit of a missed opportunity, I guess you could say. Then I'm going to move on to creating all the cabinet and drawer fronts, and as I've already mentioned that these are not going to be opening, so they just need to be sitting on top of the boxes that I've basically created for each of the cupboards. These are the top cupboards that I'm looking at the moment, and I'm just making sure that everything is as lined up as possible, because you really are going to see it not lining up if it doesn't, if that makes sense. Anyway, so I'm just going to work my way through and just work out where I want them, where I want the drawers to sit, and just going to mark those out and cut those out. So now the fun bit begins, which is actually adding some of the colour. So I'm just going to mix up some yellow oxide and some orange paint that I actually managed to get for this project. But I realised that it's actually a little bit dark, so I'm just adding a little bit more brighter yellow in there just to kind of lift up the colour. And I think that's pretty close to the inspiration piece. So just going to go through and paint all the fronts of the drawers and the doors. And I'm actually going to put 2 coats on this, and that particular piece there is like the dishwasher front, so I just want to make sure that I'm not covering it all up. Now, just because these are going to be glued on the fronts, I'm actually going to go through and paint black out to where all the gaps will be. And then also, while I've got the black paint out, I'm just going to create some base colour for the anything that's sort of stainless. And that's the oven fronts as well as the dishwasher. So then I can just go ahead and glue those in place. So you can see with the black and behind it, it just means that we've got a little bit of definition around the cabinets, which is great. And yeah, it's quite a quick and easy, simple little trick to do. So moving on to the oven, I just want to create a little bit more detail in these. They're going to be pretty flat, but I'm just going to grab some silver paint and just add some details with there on the top and the bottom, as well as the panel for the dishwasher. And then just adding in a little bit of black to the silver, I'm just going to sort of create a bit of texture across the door front. And then using a really fine brush, I'm just going to go through and create some button textures, some sort of button details on buttons and knobs, I guess you could say, onto the oven, and then the same with the dishwasher, so not as many on that. So just again, just using paint to try and add some of those details, and then I can glue those in place once they're dry. And now moving on to creating the sink, I'm just sort of measuring out how big I cut that sink hole in the bench top. Obviously that was pretty freehand without taking any actual measurements, but that's okay. I'm just going to use a bit of cardstock as the main support, and then I'm going to also cover it with a bit of silver foil that I had left over from another project. So I'm just creating the sort of the size of the sink, and then also the base of the sink as well as the sides of the sink, and then I just want to create a couple of little tabs as well, so that when I fold it up I've got something to glue it against. So yeah, I'm just going to cut those out and then fold it all up into place. So I'm just going to set that aside to dry, and I'm going to move on to creating the hob. So I'm just going to create the base of the hob black, and then I'm going to create the grill pattern on the top silver. So it's really interesting because the inspiration piece is round this way, whereas most of our hobs today are around the other way, which is silver at the bottom and then black on the top. So I'm just going to draw out the sort of pattern that I want to cut out. And this is actually really kind of tiny and quite detailed, but I did take my time with it and just persevered with it. So I think the end result looks pretty cool, but I'm just going to take my X-Acto blade and just cut out all those tiny little shapes. As you can see here, they're pretty tiny. And then I also go back and cut out the center part of those crosses just so that it gives a little bit more of a realistic look. And then I just go over that with a couple of coats of silver paint, and then just attach that to the black base. And it turned out pretty good, I think. And then just before I finish up for the day, I'm just going to glue the wall cabinets to the wall while I've got that out, as well as putting a piece of mat board against the back of the island in prep for tomorrow. So these are a couple of items that I whipped up last night off camera. So I've just made a bench seat using some pretty bright fabric, as well as a table, sort of more like a Formica table. But what I need to do now is actually create a couple of chairs, and I'm going to create these out of wire and that same fabric that's on the bench seat. So what I'm doing here is I'm just marking out or drawing out a bit of a pattern. I did the same process with the table actually, and it seemed to work really well, so I'm just going to repeat that, and then just bending the wire around to match that pattern. So this piece is actually the back of the chair, and then I've just got the front of the chair, and then I'll also create two sides of the chair. So now the wire is all created, I can actually move on to the seat and back, which I'm just going to use some mat board. And for the seat, I'm just going to basically cut the squares out and then just round the corners ever so slightly. And then using some wadding, which is just really quite thin, I'm just going to use one layer of that onto the seat to create the cushion. I used the same on the bench seat, which was just enough to give it that extra bit of padding. Then I'm just going to cover the fabric, the seat and the wadding with a little bit of fabric, and I'm just going to use some sort of Fabri-Tac glue, which immediately holds, which is great. And I'm just going to cut the little corners away just so that I can fold the fabric around so it's not too bulky. And then I'm just going to repeat that for both of the cushions or the seats, and then just make sure I pull in each one of those corners to round them out as best as I can. So to attach the metal legs to the seat, I'm actually just using some hot glue. This is not a permanent fix, this is a fast fix. So it just allowed me to put them into place and get them lined up as best as I can. And then what I do is I actually go back and glue them into place with a little bit more securely. What it did do was actually allow me to kind of line up the legs. So the legs are just the two pieces of wire that come down to form the actual detail around the legs. I knew I didn't want to actually fold them in half and have that as the feet. Like the table is sort of bent around, but I knew I wouldn't have enough space to be able to do that. So I've just got the two legs coming down to form that detail. So this is moving on to the backrest. So I'm just going to draw out the shape that I'm looking for. So the top is just going to have a little bit more of a tighter corner than the bottom. So giving it really that same shape that you would find in a Formica table and chairs. So it's probably a little bit more 60s, but it still gives us a little bit more shape rather than it just being completely square. And then just using the same process, apart from I don't put any wadding in this, and just cover it straight with the fabric. I do put a backing on it as well, because you are going to see the backing of it, which is just another flat piece of fabric. So I just go ahead and glue the fabric, pulling it round to the back of the backrest, and then just covering that up with that additional piece of fabric over the top. So then once that's all dry, I'm just going to cut away the fabric. I'm actually not going to worry about the edges at this stage unless they start to fray, but I think there's probably enough glue on the backing there to keep it all into place. And then just going to go through and use the same glue to actually glue them onto the back of the wire on the back part of the backrest. So there we go, they've all come together really well. It was a bit of a trial and error, and actually they've come out looking pretty good. So that's them all done, they're looking pretty cute, and now I'm going to pull the whole kitchen together. And there we have it, it is all finished. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this video just as much as I've enjoyed making it for you. Coming up with the ideas and creating all the details around the 1970s kitchen and dinette was so much fun, and I really enjoyed every minute of it. So if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, make sure that you subscribe, and I've actually added a couple more videos in here that I think that you might like as well. Hopefully I will see you again, and I will catch you in the next one.